In this episode of Detroit Performs, a fashion illustrator, the survival of Detroit's Orchestra Hall, and a professor of dance. It's all ahead on this edition of Detroit Performs.
Funding for Detroit Performs is provided by the Fred A. and Barbara M. Erb Family Foundation, the KRESGE Foundation, the Community Foundation for Southeast Michigan, the A. Paul and Carol C. Schaap Foundation, the Michigan Council for Arts and Cultural Affairs, the National Endowment for the Arts, the DeRoy Testamentary Foundation, and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Hello and welcome to Detroit Performs. I'm your host, DJ Oliver, continuing to social distance at home. Now I know we can't experience art in its full capacity right now, but I'm excited to bring you Detroit's art and culture scene through your screen. Let's get to our first artist. Nicole Jarecz is a fashion illustrator who finds a balance between being playful and precise in her sketches. Take a look.
I think it was really the fashion industry that inspired me to do this. It's all about the clothes for me. Fashion illustration it's like a different form of expression than photography. You have a lot of fashion photography out there, but not a lot of fashion illustration. So it's just a different expression of the figure, a different expression of the wardrobe, the way the wardrobe moves. It's different than design. I'm not like designing the clothes. I'm just taking the photo or taking the person and transforming it into something new. Before photography, there was only illustrators illustrating these ideas for magazines, and then helping designers out as well, illustrating the figure, which was a very important part of like seeing the dress before the design was made. And then, yeah, you had the illustrators who were working for Vogue or WWD. There was a guy named René Gru, and he was one of my favorite illustrators, and he, kind of dominated that field. But unfortunately, like once photography came, it was like a quick way to seize the moment, and it kind of took over illustration at the time. I think an illustration is more special than a photograph. I know a lot of talented photographers, but it's very like straightforward. This is the image. With an illustration, you're taking an idea and recreating it into something new, something more magical. I really want to express a gesture with my fashion illustrations. It's more mesmerizing. It captures like color and light and movement. That's what I want to capture with my illustrations. So sometimes I'll take a photo and I'll stylize it more. Everything is always changed up. It's never exactly the same as a photograph. I focus more on the clothing when I do the illustration. I really like couture gowns. Couture is like a high design, a way of sewing and intricate patterns. I like that it's telling a story in a way. And I just like the whole movement of the couture compared to a street style that you might see. For the mediums that I use, I play around with a lot of different things. I use colored pencil, ink, watercolor, gouache, acrylic, anything that I can find. I really like to mix it up and try different techniques. The type of clothing definitely makes a big impact on what I use for the medium. If I see a flowy dress, I might want to use watercolor because watercolor is very graceful and elegant. So I combine a lot of digital and traditional methods together, especially when I'm working for a client for a magazine. So I'll start the illustration off traditionally. I'll do like a pencil drawing and I'll do my watercolor and ink. Then I scan it in and I finish it up in Photoshop. And I might like do this several times to get the exact essence of what I'm trying to represent. I worked for a lot of different companies. In fashion, I've worked for Roger Vivier. It's like a couture shoe company in Paris. I've worked for Elle magazine and Glamour magazine, a lot of fashion magazines. My favorite project that I worked on was for Roger Vivier. I designed a bunch of greeting cards for him and his company, and that was a lot of fun. It was like a very luxurious brand to work for, and I'd really like to work for different brands like that. The daily struggle that I have is to be playful and precise at the same time. In my personal pieces, those are always the most fun for me, so I just try to be a little bit more free. I try to be a little bit more fluid in what I'm doing. I think people really respond well to my personal pieces, maybe because I am not overthinking them as much. I think that they really like the gesture that I put into my personal pieces and the color. And just the overall feeling is just more creating something that's beautiful for someone to put in their home or, you know, to show to their friends and family. I just want to share my work with people. Interacting with the community here is really important to me. I started seeing illustrators doing these sketching events a few years ago, you know, in bigger cities like New York and Paris, and I thought, I really want to bring that to Detroit. I want to do the same thing, and nobody else is doing it. So I contacted Neiman Marcus and Saks, and they were both on board, and they started having me regularly sketching. I bring all of my supplies with me, some paper, and then people just start coming up to my booth, and they see me sketching. I usually take a photo of them, or they'll stand in front of me and pose, and I'll do my sketch, and it's kind of like a takeaway gift for them for the evening. I sketch a little bit of everything. I sketch people dressed to the nines in gowns, and then I dress people in streetwear. My favorite is when people are really dressed up. It makes it a lot of fun. I like when people are dressed, you know, bold and with lots of color. It really gives me an opportunity to get out there, talk to people, interact with them, and just, you know, see what they respond to. It helps me to improve upon myself when I see if they react to one sketch compared to another sketch. Well, when I started doing these events, I realized that I had to be very quick. I only have a certain amount of time to sketch somebody. And I realized that I don't need to spend, you know, hours and hours and hours on one single illustration. People really like it when it's simple and fluid, and I try to bring that into my work at home, to remember to keep it simple, keep it playful, and don't overthink it too much. The community loves it. They're excited about it. I've had a ton of support from people here in Detroit, so it's been really great. I think that the illustration just brings a different outlook on fashion. I think people sometimes respond more to the fashion illustration than if they were to see it in person or even on their computer screen with photography. It just brings more of a special feeling. I don't think fashion illustration ever gets boring. I think it's something that evolves over time. I think my style could change again, like it has in the past. It just depends on, you know, the trends, what's going on, and what I think people are responding to at that time.
You can learn more about Nicole Jarecz, as well as all the artists that we feature on DetroitPerforms.org. Now, just as we're experiencing uneasy times out there in the world today, Orchestra Hall has experienced uneasy times throughout its years on Woodward. But as things look beyond repair for the acoustic grate, the community came together to save it. Here's the story.
A Detroit story is, I think, the story of someone being down on the mat and coming back up off the mat and putting up his fists and saying, let's go at it.
Orchestra Hall has always been very important. And then when it fell into disrepair during the late 50s, 60s, even early 70s, I became a member of one of the committees that was established to try to help save Orchestra Hall.
There are times when you can't allow yourself to be thrown about by countervailing winds. and trends, there's a point at which you just have to say, we stand for this. This is important. This needs to be here.
And so I love the history of saving the hall, because that was a moment in time when the community came together and said, this hall must be saved.
While the Orchestra Hall stage was in darkness for much of the 1950s and 60s, at times there were still glimpses of light. The Detroit Symphony Orchestra had only briefly closed and was revived during the war, and by 1952, its new musical director saw the value in a perfect acoustical space.
It's interesting because while there was nothing here on a regular basis, things still did happen here. In terms of the orchestra, most notably, is that the DSO makes a number of really extraordinary recordings here for the Mercury label in the 1950s and early 60s, conducted by Paul Perret.
There's a photograph of the Detroit Symphony Orchestra with Paul Perret on the stage of Old Orchestra Hall with one microphone hanging down.
The DSO came here, made distinguished recordings because the technology couldn't replace the impact and the feel of what it's like to be in the hall.
In spite of its occasional use as a recording studio, the fact that Orchestra Hall still had no permanent resident began to wear on the building. In 1970, plans were announced to tear down Orchestra Hall and build a new fast food restaurant on its lot, far from the fate that those who predicted a center of Detroit's musical life had suggested decades before.
Orchestra Hall was not the prettiest flower in any bouquet at that time. It had been totally abandoned for the previous 10 years. Holes in the roof, water in the basement. This has more of the appearance of a piece of Swiss cheese than it does a concert hall. And people had it easy. They could say, well, the building is old, it's got these problems, it should be torn down. Well, no, it's not. The building was really in remarkable condition because it was overly designed and overbuilt, so there was no reason to say that Orchestra Hall was crying out to be demolished.
There's a lot of lore about this hall, and some of it is true, and some of it's not true, and some of it might be true, but the idea that we almost lost this hall, that it was almost demolished, that's 100% true, but not for the actions of Paul Ganson, the bassoonist in the orchestra, who helped save Orchestra Hall, and the group of supporters around him.
We were looking for people with connections with Geno's Incorporated, the firm that bought Orchestra Hall and were going to tear it down within 2 weeks. We didn't have much money at all, but we had the offer of a mortgage. And they came to us and said, okay, we'll give you the time and we'll sell it to you for what we paid for it. So we ended up paying $100,200.
But even though quick action had saved Orchestra Hall from the wrecking ball, restoring it to its former glory would be another labor of love entirely, one that would last another 2 decades.
I think in the history of this hall, you can see that the philanthropic community has stepped up when it was really needed.
You had some major donors, but you also had lots of little donors. And I think what's really relevant here is that this hall had such a rich history that spoke to so many different parts of the community that it could draw upon a kind of broad-based support.
The key was, from what happened in this office, was to raise the money, period. So these were members of our community who were committed to rebuilding the hall, and they made phone calls and made assignments, and they stood up to the line as well.
That photograph of me on the roof of Orchestra Hall was actually from 1976, some 6 years later, when we were just beginning the real restoration, and because
It was a matter not now of just saving and sealing the building, but actually to restore it to a state where there could be events in the hall, which began in the 1976-77 season.
So many musicians tell me about playing chamber music here when there was water dripping and birds flying and who knows what else. But the most amazing chamber music performances, and people from all over the world came here to play chamber music because of the properties of acoustics.
1976, I believe, is when the Chamber Music Society of Detroit began regularly presenting concerts in this space. But you also had jazz concerts and recreations of some of the stage shows that happened during the Paradise Theater years.
That's because that's how strong the name meant. The history of it, people were still around who knew about the Paradise Theater. So it was only natural when they tried to save this building to bring that in. The idea was, and a bunch of people got together and said, let's do a Back to Paradise series.
So even through the renovation, you had a hall that was speaking to many different kinds of communities and all building support for the idea of saving this beautiful historic building.
Even when the orchestra was performing at Ford Auditorium, the musicians in the orchestra knew that this great space existed, and they wanted to really help gather a lot of support to bring the orchestra back on stage here at Orchestra Hall. And that was a big challenge because obviously there was a lot of money that was needed to fix the hall, to repair the hall.
You know, we've got pictures all around the building, all around the offices. You can see the, all of the storied supporters of this venture, like standing there pointing to the hole in the roof where you could see the sky, and bird nests in here, and it was just in bad shape. So whenever I tell that to people as they're standing here looking at this space, which just, looks ornate and beautiful and perfect, honestly, they don't believe it.
I think that this love of the space, the tenacity that people showed in embracing the space in spite of its condition, speaks to the identity that Orchestra Hall has. And that's what I love about the history, is that the hall itself has its own voice, its own life, maybe like its own heartbeat. And no one has been able to deny it who's come in and experienced it.
That's what saved us when we were trying to save Orchestra Hall, that there was enough here that it was, of course, a given that it was going to be saved, it was going to survive.
We were just so pleased that we finally had reconstructed something that was so important, had such integrity, and that as a city we had felt the value. Because after all, we had torn down the old city hall and torn down so many other places, but this we had taken the time and the interest to reconstruct, so it was important.
I think it was a turning point in the sound of the orchestra, because the sound of the orchestra in Ford Auditorium was stifled. And when we moved here, the orchestra came alive. Everyone came alive.
In 1989, the DSO returned to the hall stage and a sold-out crowd. But in spite of the triumph of that night, the orchestra's financial situation remained grim, and it was clear they would need more than just a restored building to lead the organization and its hall into a new golden age.
Now let's check out some upcoming events coming to you virtually from around the D. Next up, University of Michigan's Peter Sparling joins WRCJ's Peter Worf to talk about his latest creations and to find out what he's been up to during this COVID-19 situation.
Peter Sparling is Distinguished Professor Emeritus of Dance at the University of Michigan, and he was principal dancer with the Martha Graham Dance Company. Man in the Moon is a video that I watched of yours, which also suggests this idea that we're experiencing now about kind of being alone or being somewhere isolated, away from people. Can you tell our viewers about Man in the Moon, what we're seeing there?
Many of my works come about because I want to experiment or explore certain aspects of video technology. In this case, I knew that green screen chroma key technology would allow me to create all sorts of illusions on the screen. So at the Duderstadt Video Studio at the University of Michigan, I asked Jacques and Jeff, the technicians, to train a hot spotlight down on a green floor, thinking that I could then insert a film of an eclipse over that area of the green and give the illusion that I was actually treading the surface of a planet during an eclipse. And I was very fortunate in that I went online and I found beautiful footage by a fellow, William Castleman, who had actually filmed an eclipse in high resolution. So the piece came together quickly. I was fortunate to have permission from a colleague in the composition program at U of M, Eric Santos, to use a score that he had written, a percussion score. And it fit together wonderfully. I see a man almost kind of like a grown-up, lost little prince, you know, who's cast away on some island in the cosmos. It's a time warp. Not only is there an eclipse going on, but he's kind of going in and out of memories, of different psychological states. So in most of my works, I try to leave it open enough so that the viewer can interpret as he or she wishes, but to make it evocative enough and dynamic enough so that it keeps the viewer riveted. This obsession with video really came about through my teaching at the university, in that 20-odd years ago, a colleague and I decided that we needed to offer students the ability to make work on video, to make art on video, because we knew that video was going to become more and more important and it was going to proliferate media. Something about this pandemic that has just been staring me right in the face is this fact that video and media, social media, have become so important. Every arts organization now is bridging this pandemic and of finding modes of communication online. How does one concertize online? What happens to a group of musicians who are all playing together on Zoom? How can dancers interact on Zoom? I mean, these are questions I've been asking for years, but suddenly it seems so important. And we don't know how long this pandemic's going to last. I'm on an advisory committee for the University Musical Society, and we spent most of our last meeting talking about the use of media, of online programming. So long story short, I'm finding that all of my work in video is suddenly becoming extremely relevant to a lot of people.
And that wraps it up for this edition of Detroit Performs. As always, for more arts and culture, head to DetroitPerforms.org, where you'll find featured videos, blogs, and information on upcoming arts events. Also, check us out on Facebook and Twitter. Make sure you guys are staying safe out there. and we'll continue to do our part to bring you the best of Detroit's art scene. Until next time, get out there and show the world how Detroit performs, y'all. I'm DJ Oliver. Thanks for watching, guys.
Funding for Detroit Performs is provided by the Fred A. and Barbara M. Erb Family Foundation, the KRESGE Foundation, the Community Foundation for Southeast Michigan, the A. Paul and Carol C. Schaap Foundation, the Michigan Council for Arts and Cultural Affairs, the National Endowment for the Arts, the DeRoy Testamentary Foundation, and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.